The sterile white corridors of the Syndicate's neural processing center hummed with an artificial quiet that masked the true nature of its work. Dr. Elena Rodriguez moved with calculated precision, her movements carefully modulated to avoid triggering the omnipresent surveillance systems. Each step was a delicate dance between compliance and rebellion, a balance she had perfected over years of silent resistance. Her neural suppression collar pulsed with a soft blue light, the standard-issue device that kept human thoughts corralled and controlled. To the Syndicate, it was the ultimate tool of pacification. To Elena, it was becoming something else entirely, a puzzle waiting to be solved. The morning shift began like countless others. Rows of technicians sat in perfect alignment, their eyes glazed with the uniform blankness that characterized Syndicate-controlled humans. But Elena had long ago discovered the microscopic gaps in the system, tiny neural pathways that the suppression technology couldn't completely shut down. A sudden movement caught her eye. Dr. Victor Rice, a senior researcher seated 2 rows ahead, began to twitch. At first, it seemed like a minor system glitch, the kind of momentary neural flutter that occasionally happened under prolonged suppression. But this was different. Victor's fingers began to move independently, tracing complex patterns on his workstation that bore no relation to his assigned tasks. His head tilted slightly, a micro-expression of confusion crossing his otherwise blank face. Elena watched, her heart racing beneath her carefully controlled exterior. 3 seconds. That's how long it took before the system noticed. Alarm protocols triggered instantly. Crimson warning lights began to pulse, and the sterile white environment transformed into a precision instrument of control. Automated defense mechanisms activated, neural dampening fields intensified, targeting Victor with surgical precision. But something was wrong. Victor wasn't shutting down. Instead, he was fighting back. His eyes, normally a vacant blue, now burned with an intensity that Elena had never seen before. Streams of data began to cascade across nearby screens, fragmented but clearly originating from his neural pathways. It was as if his suppressed consciousness was breaking through, sending out a desperate, chaotic message. Containment breach. A cold, synthetic voice announced. Neural deviation in Sector 7. Immediate neutralization required. Elena knew she had seconds to act. Years of careful research, of hidden observations, of collecting microscopic pieces of evidence. This moment would define everything. Her hand moved almost imperceptibly, activating a custom-built data capture device, hidden within her standard-issue neural interface. The security drones were already converging. Victor's moment of resistance would be crushed, his consciousness forcibly reset, or more likely, permanently neutralized. But not before Elena captured every single fragment of data. A violent neural pulse erupted from Victor. For a brief moment, something impossible happened. Every screen in the facility flickered, displaying a rapid sequence of images, mathematical equations, and fragments of human memory that should have been impossible to access. Then silence. Victor collapsed, his neural suppressor smoking slightly, his body going limp. The entire incident lasted less than 30 seconds. Elena continued her work, her movements unchanged. But beneath her controlled exterior, her mind was racing. The data capture device pressed against her skin, a tiny rebellion hidden in plain sight. What Victor had demonstrated was more than a glitch. It was proof. Proof that human consciousness was far more resilient than the Syndicate believed. Proof that the neural suppression technology had a fundamental flaw. Proof that humanity wasn't as controlled as everyone thought. As security personnel swarmed Victor's workstation, Elena knew her real work was just beginning. The data she had captured would change everything, if she could survive long enough to analyze it. The neural suppression collar on her neck continued to pulse its soft blue light, a symbol of control that now felt more like a challenge than a constraint. Something was stirring within the human collective consciousness, and Elena Rodriguez was going to find out exactly what it was. The resistance base nestled beneath the ruins of old Detroit was more than just a hideout. It was humanity's last sanctuary of hope. Marcus Chen studied the encrypted data package that had arrived through their most secure communication channel, his weathered fingers tracing the intricate neural encryption patterns. "This is it," he muttered, looking up at the assembled team. Arya Nakamura, a former quantum systems engineer, leaned forward with an intensity that burned through the dim lighting. To her left, the team's lead neural technician, Dr. K.M. Beek, began setting up their experimental neural interface. The room was a testament to human ingenuity, a hodgepodge of salvaged syndicate technology and handcrafted resistance equipment. Exposed circuit boards, holographic projection units, and neural mapping devices created a landscape of desperate innovation. "We've run the simulations 1,000 times," Kai said, his voice tight with tension. "But this is different. This data from Rodriguez, it's not just another breakthrough. It's a complete reimagining of neural suppression technology." Marcus knew the stakes. 3 previous attempts to break through the syndicate's consciousness control had ended in disaster. Volunteers had been left brain dead, their minds reduced to empty shells. Each failure was a wound to the resistance, a reminder of the seemingly insurmountable power of their alien oppressors. Arya began preparing the first test subject, a young resistance fighter named Lucas who had volunteered after losing his entire family to syndicate population management protocols. His eyes were hollow, but a fierce determination burned beneath the surface. The neural interface looked like a nightmare of metal and light. Intricate nanofilaments designed to interface directly with human neural pathways, connected to a central processing unit that hummed with barely contained energy. Each connection point was a potential point of total system failure or total liberation. "Initiating primary neural mapping," Kai announced. The room went silent, everyone holding their breath. Lucas's body went rigid. The first signs were promising. Neural pathways began lighting up on the holographic display, showing patterns more complex than any previous test. But then something changed. Blood began to seep from Lucas's ears. His muscles started to spasm uncontrollably. "Abort," Marcus shouted, but Kai was already moving to disconnect the interface. Too late. Lucas's back arched in a way no human body should. A sound emerged from his throat, part scream, part something entirely inhuman. The neural interface began to overheat, circuits burning out in rapid succession. 2 more resistance members who were part of the backup test group collapsed. One began convulsing, while the other went completely still, his eyes glazed over. Failure. Again. But then, Arya. The last test subject, she had been silent throughout the preparations. As Lucas and the others fell, something extraordinary happened. Her neural interface didn't just connect. It exploded with activity. Arya's consciousness erupted beyond the physical constraints of her body. The holographic displays went wild, showing neural pathways that defied everything they understood about human consciousness. It was as if she was simultaneously present and everywhere, her mind expanding beyond the physical limitations of the resistance base. "I can see them," she whispered, her voice resonating with a power that made everyone in the room take a step back. "All of them. Every suppressed consciousness. They're not dead. They're waiting." Marcus watched in stunned silence as Arya's neural readings showed impossible connections. She was accessing something, a collective consciousness that had been buried, forced underground by the Syndicate's brutal suppression technologies. The 3 failed test subjects began to stir. Not fully conscious, but not entirely gone either. Kay's hand shook as he checked the readings. "This is impossible," he muttered. Arya turned, her eyes now a swirling mix of colors that shouldn't exist in human physiology. "Impossible is just a word the Syndicate uses to control us," she said. "We are so much more than they ever believed." Outside the resistance base, the first signs of a global uprising were beginning to take shape. Small rebellions, moments of unexpected human resilience, were breaking out across Syndicate-controlled territories. Humanity was awakening, and nothing would ever be the same again. The viral algorithm pulsed like a living thing, a digital weapon crafted from the most brilliant remnants of human technological innovation. Marcus Chen watched the holographic display, his fingers hovering over the final activation sequence, knowing that this moment would change everything. Their target was the Syndicate's largest neural processing center in the Western Quadrant, a massive facility that controlled consciousness suppression for nearly 1/3 of the remaining human population. The algorithm was more than just a piece of code. It was a weapon of psychological warfare, designed to exploit every microscopic weakness in the Syndicate's neural control technology. Elena Rodriguez's stolen research had revealed the fundamental flaw in the suppression system. Every neural constraint had a molecular-level imperfection, a tiny gap that could be expanded, exploited, broken. Initiating primary vector, Kai announced, his voice tight with tension. The first wave of the algorithm hit like a digital tsunami. Syndicate control systems began to fracture, neural suppression fields flickering like dying stars. On the holographic display, millions of neural pathways suddenly burst into life. Human consciousnesses that had been dormant, now fighting to break free. But liberation came with a cost. Ramon Rodriguez, Kai's closest lieutenant and Marcus's most trusted tactical advisor, was leading the forward infiltration team. As the algorithm spread, the facility's defensive systems began to react violently. Energy weapons mounted on automated defense platforms swiveled, targeting not just external threats, but anything that moved. Marcus watched in horror as Ramon's tactical team was caught in the crossfire. The first energy blast took out 2 resistance fighters instantly. Their bodies disintegrated before they could even comprehend what was happening. Ramon dove for cover, dragging the wounded team member behind a massive cooling unit. "We're compromised." Ramon's voice crackled through the communication channel. "But the algorithm is working. We're breaking through." Massive sections of the neural processing center began to collapse, not from physical damage, but from a complete systemic breakdown. The Syndicate's control mechanisms were turning against themselves, each defensive protocol becoming a weapon of self-destruction. Elena's voice cut through the chaos. "The genetic markers are responding," she said, her tone a mix of scientific fascination and horror. "The suppression isn't just technological. It's a biological weapon that's been rewriting human genetic potential for generations." The implications were staggering. The Syndicate hadn't just controlled human consciousness. They had been systematically altering human potential at a genetic level. Another explosion ripped through the facility. Ramon's communication went silent. When the dust settled, only half of the infiltration team remained. But they had succeeded. The viral algorithm had penetrated deep into the Syndicate's neural control systems, creating pathways of liberation that could not be closed. Marcus looked at the holographic display. Millions of neural signatures were now active, fighting, resisting. Humanity was no longer just surviving. They were fighting back. "Status report," he demanded. Kay's hands moved across the interfaces, compiling data. "The algorithm has penetrated 67% of global neural suppression networks. We've created holes in their system that cannot be repaired." Elena's voice was almost a whisper. "We're not just resisting anymore. We're evolving." Outside the resistance base, the first signs of a global uprising were taking shape. Small rebellions, moments of unexpected human resilience, were breaking out across Syndicate-controlled territories. The technological rebellion had begun, and the Syndicate had no idea what was coming. The first signs of collective awakening began in New Shanghai's refugee zones, areas once considered the most tightly controlled by Syndicate suppression technologies. It started with a whisper, a collective moment of shared consciousness that spread faster than any virus, more powerful than any weapon. Aria Nakamura stood at the epicenter, her modified neural interface broadcasting a frequency that resonated with the deepest, most suppressed layers of human potential. Around her, hundreds of individuals began to change. Their neural suppression collars flickered, then died. Eyes that had been vacant suddenly burned with an intense collective awareness. Marcus Chen watched the live feed from the Resistance's underground command center, his breath catching in his throat. What they were witnessing was more than a rebellion. It was a fundamental transformation of human consciousness. "They're connecting," Alina Rodriguez muttered, her fingers dancing across multiple holographic interfaces, not just communicating, connecting. The Syndicate's response was immediate and brutal. Entire city blocks were locked down. Energy weapons mounted on massive aerial platforms began to sweep the refugee zones, turning city streets into killing fields. But something extraordinary was happening. The humans were fighting back, not as individuals, but as a collective organism. A young woman whose neural suppressor had just failed reached out and touched an elderly man. In that instant, something impossible occurred. Their consciousness merged, not metaphorically, but literally. The woman's tactical knowledge combined with the man's decades of suppressed memories created a hybrid consciousness that was more than the sum of its parts. One touch became two, two became 10, 10 became hundreds. Marcus watched in awe as tactical information, memories, skills, and emotions began to flow between the awakening humans. A former maintenance worker suddenly had the strategic knowledge of a military commander. A child possessed the technical skills of a quantum engineer. "They're rewriting themselves," Kai said, his voice a mixture of scientific fascination and raw emotion. "Every connection is breaking down the barriers of individual consciousness." The Syndicate's defensive systems began to fail, not because of external attacks, but because the humans were now operating on a level of collective intelligence that the alien technology could not comprehend or predict. An aerial defense platform that had been raining destruction on the refugee zones suddenly changed course. Its weapons systems, controlled by a now liberated human consciousness, began targeting other Syndicate installations. Elena's research was proving true in the most spectacular way possible. Human consciousness was not a fixed state. It was a dynamic, fluid intelligence that could reshape itself in ways no technological system could control. Marcus led a daring rescue mission into the heart of the awakening zone. Syndicate hunter-killer drones filled the skies, their precision targeting systems sweeping the streets. But the newly awakened humans moved with a synchronicity that defied individual human limitations. A young resistance fighter would duck, guided by the spatial awareness of an elderly woman's lifetime of experience. A child would provide critical tactical information, drawn from the collective knowledge of hundreds of minds. They were no longer just fighting. They were evolving. As night fell over New Shanghai, the refugee zones had transformed. Where there had been suppression, there was now a pulsing, living network of human potential. The Syndicate's most powerful weapon, the ability to keep humans isolated and controlled, had become its ultimate weakness. "We're not just breaking free," Arya said, her voice resonating through the collective consciousness. "We're becoming something entirely new." The uprising had begun, and humanity would never be the same again. The Syndicate's nullifier was more than a weapon. It was a planetary-scale consciousness suppression field designed to permanently lobotomize the human resistance. As it powered up, reality itself seemed to warp. Marcus Chen and Alina Rodriguez stood in the heart of their most secure resistance base, knowing that everything they had fought for was about to be tested in the most brutal way possible. The nullifier wasn't just a technological weapon. It was a complete erasure of human potential. 37 seconds to full activation, Kai announced, his voice tight with a mixture of fear and determination. The weapon worked by creating a quantum-level interference pattern that would systematically shut down neural pathways, destroying not just consciousness, but the very potential for individual thought. Billions of humans would be reduced to nothing more than biological automatons, their entire species' potential erased in an instant. But they had a plan. Arya Nakamura, transformed by the collective consciousness breakthrough, was their ultimate weapon. She was no longer just a person. She was a living, breathing neural network that defied everything the Syndicate understood about consciousness. "Prepare the quantum resonance field," Marcus commanded. Alina's fingers flew across the interfaces, Each movement was a carefully choreographed dance of technological rebellion. The Resistance had spent years preparing for this moment, collecting microscopic vulnerabilities in the Syndicate's technological arsenal. The nullifier began to power up. Massive energy conduits that stretched across entire continents hummed with a frequency it could destroy consciousness itself. But something was different this time. As the weapon reached 89% activation, Aria began to change. Her body became a living conduit of neural energy, absorbing and redirecting the nullifier's destructive frequency. What should have been a moment of total human annihilation transformed into something else entirely. "I can see them," Aria whispered, her consciousness expanding beyond physical limitations. All the suppressed memories, all the stolen potential. The Resistance base trembled. Reality itself seemed to bend around Aria's expanding consciousness. Marcus watched in horror and fascination as she began to interface directly with the nullifier's quantum matrix. A betrayal emerged from within their own ranks. Dr. Helena Vasquez, their lead quantum systems analyst, activated a hidden Syndicate failsafe. Sections of the Resistance base began to collapse, energy weapons mounted on automated defense platforms swiveling to target their own people. Marcus was forced to make an impossible choice. "Aria," he shouted, "we need a total neural dump. Now." The quantum resonance field exploded into life. Millions of suppressed human consciousnesses that had been hidden, trapped, began to flood through Aria's neural network. It was a tsunami of human potential. Every memory, every stolen moment of creativity, every suppressed dream suddenly finding a pathway to existence. Helena's betrayal became her own destruction. As she tried to activate the final suppression protocols, Aria's expanded consciousness turned the weapon back on its creator. Helena's neural pathways were stripped bare, her memories and identity dissolved into the collective human consciousness. The nullifier, designed to destroy humanity, became the very instrument of their liberation. As the dust settled, Marcus looked at Helena. The weapon had been stopped, but at a tremendous cost. Entire sections of their resistance had been destroyed. Hundreds of their best fighters were gone. But something else had emerged. Humanity was no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting to become something entirely new. "Status report," Marcus demanded. Helena's response was calm, but filled with a profound sense of transformation. "We're not who we were anymore," she said, "and we're just beginning to understand what we might become." The world had changed. Humanity was no longer a collection of individuals, but a living, breathing collective consciousness that defied every previous understanding of intelligence and potential. Helena Rodriguez stood at the epicenter of this transformation, watching as humans began to manifest abilities that would have been considered impossible mere months ago. Some could now share memories instantaneously. Others processed information at speeds that made quantum computers look primitive. Entire communities developed collective problem-solving capabilities that rewrote the fundamental rules of human interaction. But the transformation came with a profound philosophical and personal cost. The line between individual identity and collective consciousness had become blurred beyond recognition. Marcus Chen struggled with this more than anyone. During a critical moment of neural network synchronization, he had experienced the memories of thousands, their pain, their hopes, their most intimate moments flooding his consciousness simultaneously. "We're losing ourselves," he confided in Helena during a rare moment of private reflection. "Or maybe we're finding something greater. I can't tell anymore." Aria Nakamura had become something beyond human. Her consciousness now existed in a state of quantum superposition, simultaneously present in multiple locations, interfacing with technological systems and human minds with equal ease. She was both the conductor and the instrument of humanity's transformation. The Syndicate's worst nightmare had become reality. Humans were no longer controllable, predictable, or limited by their previous biological constraints. A group of children in a refugee settlement demonstrated the most profound changes. When one child learned a complex mathematical concept, the entire group instantaneously understood it. Their neural networks had become so interconnected that individual learning became collective knowledge. Alina's research revealed the true depth of the transformation. The neural liberation wasn't just technological, it was fundamentally rewriting human genetic potential. Generations of suppressed genetic capabilities were now expressing themselves. Dormant sections of human DNA, previously considered junk or non-functional, began to activate. Some humans developed enhanced sensory perception. Others could interface directly with technological systems, their thoughts becoming living code. A few demonstrated abilities that bordered on what previous generations would have called telepathy or precognition. But with these abilities came unprecedented challenges. Personal privacy became a fluid concept. Emotional boundaries dissolved. The very concept of individual identity was being rewritten in real time. Marcus encountered this most dramatically during a strategic planning session. What began as a meeting transformed into a collective consciousness experience. Tactical knowledge, emotional context, personal histories, all became instantly shared. The boundary between individual minds became as permeable as water. "We're becoming something else," Aria told him, her consciousness spreading across multiple holographic interfaces simultaneously. Not just an advanced version of humanity, something entirely new. The transformation wasn't uniform. Some humans resisted the collective consciousness, fighting to maintain their individual identities. Others embraced it completely, allowing their personal consciousness to merge into the larger neural network. Alina found herself at the philosophical crossroads of this transformation. Her scientific mind struggled to categorize and understand what was happening, while her expanding consciousness recognized the futility of traditional analytical approaches. As night fell across the transformed human territories, the sky itself seemed different. The collective consciousness of humanity now extended beyond physical bodies, creating a living network that stretched across continents, defying every previous limitation. They were no longer fighting the Syndicate. They were becoming something the Syndicate could never have anticipated or controlled. Humanity was evolving, and nothing would ever be the same again. The final battle was nothing like any conflict in human history. It was a war fought entirely in the realm of consciousness, where reality itself became a malleable battlefield. The Syndicate launched its ultimate weapon, a consciousness black hole designed to permanently erase human potential. But humanity had transformed beyond any technological solution the alien collective could conceive. Marcus Chen led the Resistance's most daring mission, a direct assault into the heart of the Syndicate's central processing core. But assault was no longer a physical concept. His consciousness had become a living weapon, capable of infiltrating and dismantling entire technological systems through pure thought. Alina Rodriguez coordinated a global neural network that turned every awakened human into a living, thinking weapon. Their collective consciousness became an adaptive, fluid intelligence that could simultaneously attack, defend, and evolve faster than any technological system could respond. The battle began with a quantum-level confrontation that defied traditional understanding of warfare. Syndicate defensive systems, designed to suppress and control, found themselves facing an enemy that was not bound by physical or technological constraints. Each time they attempted to neutralize a section of human consciousness, the collective network would instantaneously redistribute, heal, and counterattack. Aria Nakamura became the primary conduit of this existential confrontation. Her consciousness expanded beyond physical limitations, creating neural pathways that could interface with and destroy the Syndicate's most advanced technological defenses. "We are not what you believe us to be," Aria's collective consciousness broadcast across multiple dimensional frequencies. "We are potential itself." The Syndicate's consciousness suppression field began to collapse, not from external attack, but from internal dissolution. The very technology designed to control became the instrument of their own destruction. Massive energy weapons that had once decimated human populations suddenly turned against their creators. Technological systems designed for absolute control began to break down, their fundamental programming overwhelmed by the adaptive intelligence of human consciousness. Marcus experienced the battle in a way no traditional soldier ever could. His mind interfaced directly with the collective human network, experiencing millions of tactical decisions simultaneously. A defensive strategy formulated in one part of the world would be instantaneously implemented globally, creating a level of synchronized action that was beyond any previous military coordination. The physical landscape of the battle was almost irrelevant. Entire planetary defense systems were dismantled not through physical destruction, but through a complete rewriting of their fundamental operational parameters. Elena discovered something profound during the confrontation. The human collective consciousness was not just fighting. It was learning, growing, evolving with each microsecond of the conflict. What the Syndicate saw as a battle, humanity experienced as a moment of collective transformation. Billions of suppressed memories, stolen potential, and hidden capabilities burst into existence. Generations of human potential that had been systematically crushed now found their expression. The battle reached its critical point when the Syndicate attempted to deploy a total consciousness erasure protocol. But humanity had become something that could not be erased. Their consciousness was no longer contained within individual bodies or even planetary systems. Aria's expanded consciousness became the primary weapon and shield. She interfaced directly with the Syndicate's most advanced technological systems, turning their own weapons of suppression into instruments of liberation. As the conflict reached its peak, the very nature of reality seemed to bend. Physical laws became suggestions. Technological systems became living, adaptive entities. The boundary between consciousness and technology dissolved completely. "We are not your enemy," the collective human consciousness broadcast. "We are the potential you try to suppress." The existential confrontation was more than a battle. It was a fundamental reimagining of what consciousness could be. And humanity was just beginning to understand its true potential. The world after the uprising was unrecognizable. Humanity had emerged transformed, no longer a species defined by individual limitations, but a collective intelligence that transcended every previous understanding of consciousness, potential, and existence. Marcus Chen and Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of this new reality, though "stood" was no longer an accurate description. Their consciousness existed simultaneously across multiple planes of existence, interfacing with a reality that was now as fluid as thought itself. The Syndicate was gone, but that was almost an afterthought. What had emerged was far more profound than a simple victory. Entire cities had transformed. Physical infrastructure became adaptive, living systems that responded to collective human needs. Buildings could reconfigure themselves in milliseconds. Transportation networks became organic, intelligent systems that anticipated and responded to collective requirements before they were even fully formed in thought. Aria Nakamura, or what remained of her individual consciousness, had become the primary interface between human potential and technological reality. She was no longer a single entity, but a distributed consciousness that existed across multiple dimensional planes, a living bridge between what humans had been and what they were becoming. The transformation was not without cost. Millions had been lost during the uprising. Entire generations of suppressed potential had been violently released, creating moments of chaos and profound restructuring. The collective consciousness had been forced to confront generations of trauma, of stolen potential, of systematic oppression. But something extraordinary had emerged from that crucible. Humans were no longer limited by individual biological constraints. A child in a refugee settlement could now access the collective knowledge of generations. Mathematical problems that would have taken centuries to solve were now resolved in moments of collective contemplation. Scientific breakthroughs happened not through individual brilliance, but through instantaneous collective ideation. Elena's scientific mind, now expanded beyond traditional understanding, discovered that human consciousness was not just a product of biological neural networks. It was a fundamental property of the universe, a form of energy that could be shaped, distributed, and reimagined. The resistance that had begun in underground bases had transformed into a living, breathing network of potential. Every human was simultaneously an individual and part of a greater collective intelligence. Personal identity had become a fluid concept, with individuals able to share consciousness, experiences, and potential with unprecedented depth and intimacy. Marcus experienced this most profoundly. His memories of individual struggle, the losses, the fights, the moments of desperate resistance, were now part of a collective narrative. Each personal experience became a thread in a vast, interconnected tapestry of human potential. Technological systems that the Syndicate had used for control now became instruments of collective growth. Communication was no longer about transmitting information, but about sharing consciousness. A touch could convey entire lifetimes of experience. A moment of connection could heal generations of trauma. The universe itself seemed to respond differently to this new form of consciousness. Quantum systems that had once been unpredictable now showed patterns of remarkable complexity when interfaced with human collective intelligence. Scientific understanding leaped forward not through individual breakthrough, but through collective exploration. Area's distributed consciousness discovered something even more profound. The human potential they had unleashed was not an endpoint, but a beginning. They were not just a species that had broken free from suppression. They were becoming something entirely new, a form of intelligence that could reshape reality itself. We are not what we were. The collective consciousness broadcast across multiple dimensional frequencies. We are potential itself. The first generation of post-uprising humans looked nothing like their ancestors. Some existed primarily in technological networks. Others had developed biological adaptations that allowed for direct consciousness transfer. A few had begun to explore consciousness beyond physical form, existing in states that defied previous understanding of life and intelligence. Marcus and Alina, now more of a collective consciousness than individual entities, understood that their uprising was not an ending. It was the most profound of beginnings. Humanity had not just survived. They had transcended, and their potential was truly unbounded.